On the 3rd of March 2018, a little after 2 in the morning, a sheriff's deputy named Aaron Pruitt pulled onto a county road east of Sweet Home, Oregon, to check on a truck that had gone off the shoulder. Pruitt was 31 years old. He had been with the county for 6 years. The truck belonged to a 63-year-old man named Delbert Rourke, who lived alone outside town and drove that road most nights of his life. Rourke was never located. The body camera segment logged into the county evidence system that night runs 11 seconds. Aaron Pruitt resigned in June of that same year and has not spoken publicly ever since. Most of what follows exists because someone filed a public records request 2 years later, asking for the full incident file.
The response that came back listed the body camera footage as partially withheld and the deputy's original narrative report as redacted. The county cited an open investigation. The case is still carried as a missing person. It has never been closed and it has never been explained. What is known comes from the deputy himself, from the account he gave before he stopped giving accounts, and from the tow operator who came out to the scene at dawn. There's very little else. The dispatch log survives in part. A single audio call survives. A tow invoice survives. The rest of it, the report and the footage and the interview transcripts, exists in the file the way a shape exists behind frosted glass, present and unreadable, released only in the outline of what was taken out. This is that account put back together from the pieces that were allowed out. Delbert Rourke was not a man anyone worried about. That is worth saying at the start because it is part of why the whole thing was slow to become anything. He was 63, retired off the mill, a widower, and he lived alone on a few acres north of the county road with a dog and a garden and not much else. He kept odd hours. He had trouble sleeping, people said, and when he could not sleep, he drove. He would go into town in the middle of the night for coffee at the one gas station that stayed open, and then he would drive the county roads for an hour or two until he was tired enough to go home, and everyone who knew him knew this about him. And so a truck of his sitting off the shoulder at 2 in the morning with the lights on was, at first, not alarming to anyone. It was just Delbert out driving the way he did. That is the frame the whole night started inside. A harmless old man who could not sleep. It took the mud later to break that frame open. The call came in as nothing, a truck off the shoulder, hazard lights going, no driver in sight. It had been phoned in by a motorist who did not stop, who saw the lights from the road and called it in from a gas station in town a few minutes later and then went home. Dispatch ran the plate. The truck was registered to Delbert Rourke. There was a number on file. Nobody answered it. The motorist who called it in is worth a moment because he is one of the small wrong notes that only sound wrong later. He phoned from the gas station in town, the same station Rourke drove to most nights, and he told dispatch he had seen a truck off the road with its lights going. And dispatch asked if anyone was hurt, and he said he did not know. He had not stopped. When dispatch asked why he had not stopped, the man did not have a good answer. He said something about not liking the look of it. He said he had slowed down, and something about the scene had made him decide to keep driving and call it in from town instead. And he could not say what, only that he had gotten a feeling off it. In the second, his headlights swept the shoulder and had put his foot down. Dispatch took his name and let him go. It is in the log. A man drove past a truck off the road in the middle of the night and did not stop. Not because he was callous, but because something about it, in the half second of his own headlights, told him not to. He was the first person to make that decision that night. He was not the last. Pruitt was the closest unit. He said later it was a routine night, cold and clear, no wind, the kind of quiet that county roads get after 2 in the morning when the last of the mill traffic is long gone. He drove out, expecting to find a man asleep in his cab, or a man walking home, or a man who had already been picked up by a friend and left the truck for the morning. He did not expect any of it to matter. He knew Rourke's name off the plate before he got there, knew the truck, knew the man's habit of driving the roads at night, and everything in him was set up to find an old insomniac and give him a ride home. That is the frame he drove out inside. It held right up until his light found the empty cab, and then it started coming apart one piece at a time, and it did not stop coming apart for the rest of his life. He found the truck where it had been called in, nose into the ditch, back end still on the gravel. The hazard lights were going, the headlights were on, and that was the first thing that did not sit right with him, though he could not have said why at the time. A man who runs off the road and walks away turns his truck off. He does not leave the headlights burning into an empty field. Pruitt pulled in behind it and lit it up with his spotlight and got out. The cab was empty. He walked up on the driver's side with his light and looked in, and there was nobody there. The keys were in the ignition. The engine was cold, which meant the truck had been sitting a while, longer than the few minutes since the call. And on the console, in the cup holder, there was a paper cup of gas station coffee. And when Pruitt put his hand near it, it was still warm. He stood there with that for a second. A cold engine and warm coffee do not go together. A man does not sit in a cold truck long enough for the engine to lose all its heat and keep a cup of coffee warm the whole time. He filed it away. He would file a lot of things away that night, one after another, and only later, laying them side by side, would he see that not one of them fit. There were other things in the cab, and Pruitt noted them the way you note things at a scene without weighing them yet. Rourke's wallet was on the passenger seat, out, open, his license and his cash still in it. Which is not how a man leaves a truck he means to walk away from, and not how a man gets robbed. His phone was in the door pocket. His jacket was still hung on the back of the seat, and it was cold out. Cold enough that a man walking home in March takes his jacket, and the jacket was there. The dome light was on because the door was open. The radio was off. There was mud on the pedals, fresh, and mud on the floor mat. And Pruitt would remember that later because there was no mud tracked out of the truck. None on the running board, none on the gravel by the door, as though a man had gotten mud on his boots getting in, and then had never used those boots to step down out of the cab at all. Everything a man carries was still in the truck. The man was not. Pruitt stood at the open door with his light going over all of it, and the arithmetic had not started yet, but the numbers were already on the table. The driver's door was the next thing. It was open, standing open into the road, and Pruitt had assumed as he walked up that it had come open in the crash. But the truck had gone off nose first into a shallow ditch. It had not rolled. It had not hit anything hard enough to spring a door. And when he looked at the door, really looked at it, the metal was bent the wrong way. It was peeled outward, away from the cab, the way a door bends when something pushes it open from the inside with more force than a man has in his arm. The hinges were strained, the frame was pulled. He told himself it was the impact. He told himself the ditch, the angle, some torque he did not understand. He was not a mechanic. He wrote it down in his head as impact damage, and he moved on, because the alternative was not something a deputy writes down at 2 in the morning on a missing driver call. But he had put his hand on it. That was the part he could not fully talk himself past, the part that came back to him afterward. He had put his hand on the top edge of the door where it was bent, and the metal there was pushed out and up, and the paint had cracked along the fold the way paint cracks when metal is bent once, hard in a single motion, not the way it crazes when a door's worked back and forth. Something had bent that door one time from the inside with a great deal of force and had not bothered with it after. And the window was down. That was the other thing. The driver's window was rolled all the way down in March at 2 a.m. in the cold, which no man does driving home, and the glass was intact, so the window had been put down on purpose by somebody. And then the door had been opened by force anyway, as though whatever wanted in had started with the window and lost patience. He did not let himself follow that. He was a deputy on a missing driver call, and the sun was hours off, and he had a shoulder to walk. He closed the thought, and he moved on. The door went into his head as impact damage and stayed there until the tow operator at dawn looked at the same door and asked him what in the hell had done that. And by then, Pruitt had already decided the door was one of the things that was not going to be allowed to be real. He keyed his radio and told dispatch the driver was not on scene and he was going to walk the shoulder. Then he took his flashlight and started up the road on foot, the way you do, looking for a man who might have wandered off dazed, might be sitting in the ditch, might be anywhere. The body camera was running the whole time. It had been running since he got out of the car. That is standard. What survives of the next part is 11 seconds of that footage. And Pruitt walked into it without any idea it was the only piece of the night that would be allowed to exist. He came up past the front of the truck, past the headlights, into the dark, beyond where the beams cut out. His flashlight was the only thing now. He swept it along the shoulder, along the tree line, along the ditch. And on the far side, up the road, at the edge where the gravel gave way to the trees, the light found something. He said afterward, in the account he gave before he stopped, that at first his mind tried to make it a man. That is what he was looking for, a man, and so for a moment the shape was a man standing at the edge of the road. But it was too tall, it stood too high off the ground. The proportions were wrong in a way he registered before he could name it, and the thing did not move the way a man surprised by a light moves. It did not flinch, it did not raise a hand. It stood there in his beam, and it was facing him. And it was far larger than anything that should have been standing at the edge of a county road. He said the stillness was the worst of it. An animal caught in a light runs or freezes and then breaks. A man throws up a hand against the glare. This did neither. It held, and it held facing him. And there was an attention to it, a sense of being looked back at, that he could not put into a report and did not try to. He said the eyes took the light and threw it back, low, the way an animal's do, but too high off the ground, too far apart, at a height that put them above his own. He said he could hear his own breathing and nothing else, that the road had gone completely silent, the particular silence of a place where every smaller thing has already decided to be still. And he said there was a smell on the air out there, the same smell the tow operator would find in the cab at dawn, rank and thick and wrong, carried to him on no wind at all. His light dropped. That is where the footage ends. 11 seconds, and then his hand came down, the beam swung to the gravel, and whatever the camera might have caught next is not in the file. Pruitt always said he did not remember deciding to drop the light. He said his arm just came down, the way your hand comes off a hot stove before you have finished understanding it is hot. And by the time he had his beam back up and pointed at the tree line, the edge of the road was empty. And there was no sound of anything leaving, no brush breaking, no steps, nothing crossing the gravel. It had been there, and then the light came back, and it was not, and in between there had been no noise at all. He did not fire. He said that clearly later, the one thing he was certain of. He did not draw, and he did not fire. He backed up, he put the truck between himself and the tree line, and he got on the radio, and he asked for another unit. And his voice on that radio call is the one piece of audio the county did release. and it is the voice of a man holding himself very carefully together. The second unit was a deputy named Kessler, working the west end of the county, and he was a good 10 minutes out. Those 10 minutes are not in any recording. What is known is that when Kessler arrived, Pruitt was standing at the back of his own patrol car with his weapon holstered and his light off, and he would not walk back up the shoulder. Kessler said as much later in the one statement of his that made it into the file before it was redacted. He said Pruitt was not hurt and was not making sense and would not go past the front of the truck. Kessler thought at first there was somebody dangerous in the trees. He drew and he cleared the tree line himself with his own light, and he found nothing. No man, no animal, nothing. The two of them waited out the rest of the dark at the back of Pruitt's car. Kessler wanted to push the tree line again, and Pruitt would not go, and Kessler, to his credit, did not make him. They sat with the lights going, and they did not talk much, and Kessler said later that a couple of times in that last hour before the gray came up, he had the feeling of being watched from the timber, the specific animal feeling of it, the one you cannot argue yourself out of, and that he checked the tree line with his light more than once and found nothing each time and kept checking anyway. He said Pruitt did not check. Pruitt sat facing the road with his back to the trees and would not turn around. And Kessler understood that Pruitt had already looked once and was not going to look again. They called it in as a missing driver and they called for a search. By the time the sun started coming up, they had a K-9 unit on scene, a handler, and a dog out of the next county over because the sheriff's office wanted a track on Delbert Rourke before the trail went cold. And here is where the night stopped. Being a night, a man walked away from his truck and became something the county has spent years keeping in a drawer. It had rained for 3 days before the 3rd of March. The shoulder was soft. The ditch was mud. The whole edge of that road was the kind of ground that takes a print and holds it, and the searchers left their own boot prints all over it as they worked, and the dog left its paw prints, and every one of those registered clean and deep in the mud. The ground recorded everything that walked on it that morning. The dog picked up Delbert Rourke at the driver's door. It took the scent right away, strong, and it pulled the handler out along the shoulder, up the road, the direction Pruitt had walked. It went maybe 6 feet, and then it stopped. It did not lose the scent the way a dog loses a scent, casting around, circling, picking up a thread, and following it off in a new direction. It stopped like the scent ended, like Delbert Rourke had walked 6 feet from his own truck door and then stopped existing. The dog stood at that spot and would not go forward and would not take it any other way. And the handler ran it again from the door, and it came to the same 6 feet and stopped at the same place, and he ran it a third time and it stopped again. 6 feet from the door, every time, and nothing beyond it. The handler was not a man given to drama. He had worked dogs for the state for a long time, on searches and on bodies, and he had seen every ordinary way a track can fail. A scent gets rained out, it gets blown off a ridge, it gets crossed and confused by other people walking through, or a dog gets tired, or a dog gets a stronger scent and abandons a weaker one. He knew all of those, and this was none of them. His dog was fresh and the conditions were perfect, and there were no crossing tracks out along that shoulder, and the dog did not fail the way a dog fails. It succeeded all the way to a point, and then the thing it was following was simply not there to follow anymore. He said the dog's behavior at that spot was not confusion, it was refusal. The dog reached the end of the scent and sat down and looked back at him, and would not be sent forward, and he had never in all his years had a dog do that, sit down at a spot and decline the ground ahead of it as though the ground itself were the problem. He wrote it up carefully, the way careful men do, and his write-up is one of the things that came back redacted. What survives of it is the fact of the 6 feet. That alone would have been strange. What made it worse was the mud. The searchers went over that ground looking for Rourke's tracks, and they found them. One set, leading from the driver's door out along the shoulder. A man's boots, his size, going the direction the dog had gone. 6 feet of them. And then nothing, no more prints. The tracks did not turn, did not double back, did not walk off into the ditch or the trees. They went 6 feet into soft mud that took every other print laid on it that morning, and they stopped, and past the last one, the ground was clean. A man does not stop leaving footprints. His weight does not stop. If he had been picked up, carried, there would be sign of that. Drag marks, disturbed ground, the prints of whatever carried him. There was nothing, just the last boot print, complete, both feet, and then mud that had recorded the searchers and the dog and everything else that touched it, and had recorded nothing where Delbert Rourke should have kept walking. And there was the other thing, the thing at the edge of the road, the shape in Pruitt's light. Whatever it had been standing on that same soft ground. The searchers knew where it had stood, roughly, from Pruitt's account, and from the direction the footage pointed. They went over that ground too. And there was nothing there either, no print, no mark, something that had stood tall enough and heavy enough to be what Pruitt described, standing on mud that took a dog's paw and a man's boot cleanly, and it had left the ground unbroken. Nothing went in, nothing came out, one set of human tracks that stopped in the middle of open ground, and a scent that ended in the same place, and a patch of shoulder where something large had stood and weighed nothing at all. The tow operator came out at first light. His name was Gene Halstead, and he ran the only wrecker in that part of the county, and he had pulled trucks off that road for 30 years. He talked later more than the deputies did, and a lot of what is known about the scene in daylight comes from him. He said the first thing he noticed pulling up was that nobody was doing anything. There were 3 or 4 units on scene and a K9 truck, and everybody was standing around the shoulder not moving, and the dog was sitting down and would not work. And there was a mood on the whole thing he did not like. He said it was the quietest scene he had ever worked. No radio chatter to speak of. Men standing at the edge of the light not talking to each other. He said it reminded him of the way people stand around after something has already gone very wrong, a funeral quiet, except nobody had found a body and nobody could say what had gone wrong, and that was worse. Men standing in funeral quiet over an empty truck. He said he had pulled a lot of vehicles off that road over 30 years, wrecks and breakdowns and drunks in the ditch, and he had a routine, and the routine had a rhythm to it. Hook it and winch it and talk to whoever was standing around while the cable came tight. That morning, nobody talked to him. He hooked the truck in the quiet and he did his work, and the deputies watched him do it and watched the tree line more than they watched him. And he found himself by the end watching the tree line too, without knowing what he was watching for, catching the mood off the men the way you catch a yawn. He said he was glad to get the truck on the deck and get his own doors shut. He looked at the driver's door when he hooked it, because a bent door is a thing a towman notices, and he asked out loud what had done it, and nobody answered him. And he said the deputy, Pruitt, gave him a look that he understood later but did not understand then, a look that asked him to let it go. He let it go. He winched the truck up with its bent door and its dome light still burning and the smell still in the cab, and he hauled it back to his lot in town, and that is where it sat. He hooked up Rourke's truck, and he said when he got up close to the cab, into it, there was a smell. Not a dead smell, he was clear about that, not a body. Something else, something rank and animal and wrong, thick inside the cab. The kind of smell that gets into the back of your throat. He said it did not belong in a farm truck. He said he rolled the windows up before he towed it because he did not want it in his own truck on the way back. And he said one more thing, which is the thing that seems to have made it into the file and then made it back out of the file. He said that before he left, the deputy, Pruitt, took him aside, away from the others, and asked him not to write the door in his report. The bent door. Pruitt asked him to leave it out. Halstead said Pruitt looked like a man who had already figured out that some of what he had seen was not going to be allowed to stay written down, and was trying to get ahead of it. Halstead said he did not know what to make of that at the time. He wrote what he wrote, he does not know what happened to it. That is where the account that came from the two of them ends, more or less. The searchers stayed out for 2 more days. They brought in more dogs and a helicopter with a thermal camera, and volunteers who walked the drainage on both sides of the road for a mile in each direction. They found nothing that belonged to Delbert Rourke, but they found other things, and some of those things are in the parts of the file that came out, and they do not help. A 1/4 mile up the road in the timber above the ditch, one of the volunteers found a place where the ground was disturbed over a wide area, brush pushed down, and small trees bent, and no clear track through any of it, as though something large had moved through without walking or had been there without leaving the ordinary sign of a thing that walks. The thermal camera on the helicopter picked up nothing warm in the drainage that night that the searchers could not account for, which is its own kind of strange and country that holds deer and elk and bear, as though the drainage had emptied out. And more than one searcher reported the same thing the tow operator reported and the deputy reported. The smell in patches along the tree line, rank and thick, there and then gone as you walk through it, tied to no carcass and no den anyone could find. They did not find Delbert Rourke. They did not find any part of him or his hat or anything he had been carrying. He drove that road most nights of his life, and one night in March he stopped on the shoulder with the engine running and the headlights on and a warm cup of coffee in the holder, and he got out, or he was taken out through a door that bent the wrong way, and he walked 6 feet, and then the world stopped keeping any record of him. Now here is the part that the public records request pried loose 2 years on. When the request came back, the body camera footage was listed as partially withheld, 11 seconds released. The rest, however much there was, held back under the open investigation. And the deputy's original narrative report, the one Pruitt wrote in the hours after that night, was returned redacted, not missing. Redacted, which means it existed and someone had gone through it and decided which parts of it could be seen. The 11 seconds are not all there was. That is the thing the redaction gives away. Pruitt's first written account described more than 11 seconds of it. He wrote down what he saw at the edge of the road in whatever detail a man writes at 4 a.m. with his hands still not steady, and that description is what is gone. The version of the file that survives is the version with the seeing cut out of it. The shape at the tree line exists in the record now only as an absence, a blacked out paragraph, a note that footage was withheld. And Pruitt's account did not match itself for long. The narrative he wrote that night and the statement he gave later to the investigators from the state when the missing person case went up the chain were not the same. The fuller one, the one written while it was still fresh, is the one the county will not release. The later one, the one that survives, is shorter and colder and says less. It is not that Pruitt lied, it is that the record of what he saw got smaller each time it changed hands, and the direction it shrank in was always the same direction, always toward less, always toward nothing to see here. He was not hiding what he saw, something above him was deciding it could not be allowed to exist on paper. And Pruitt seems to have understood that faster than anyone, understood it standing on the shoulder at 2 a.m. when he asked the tow operator to leave the door out. He had already done the arithmetic. a man who leaves no tracks past 6 feet, a shape that stands on soft mud and leaves the ground unbroken. 11 seconds where there should be more, a door bent outward from the inside, a cold engine and warm coffee. None of it could be written down and kept, because written down and kept it added up to something the county could not carry as an open missing person file. So it was made to add up to less. The person who filed the records request kept notes on what they got back, and those notes are how the shape of the withholding is known. The evidence log listed the body camera file with a runtime and then listed the release version with a shorter one, and the difference is not accounted for anywhere. The K9 handler's report is present as a page with most of its body blacked out, and only the header and the sign off-legible. The photographs taken of the scene at dawn are listed by number in an index, and then several of those numbers are missing from the release, present in the count and absent from the folder, and the ones missing are, by their position in the sequence, the photographs of the door and the photographs of the shoulder where the track stopped. The index counts them. The folder does not contain them. That is the whole thing in miniature. The county's own paperwork admits, by its own numbering, that there is more than it is showing, and points at exactly the parts it will not show. And the parts it will not show are the parts where the impossible things are. Pruitt filed fewer and fewer reports after that night. He was quiet through the spring. And in June he resigned, and he gave no reason that anyone recorded. And he left the county, and he has never spoken about it since. People who knew him said it was not fear. That is the thing they were careful to say. He did not leave because he was afraid of the trees. He left because of what he had understood about the file. He had seen something that could not stay in the record, and he had watched the record close over it. And he could not go back to writing reports for a system that would edit out the parts that mattered the moment they mattered. He understood what filing does. Filing something makes it real, official, a thing the county has to answer for. And he had learned that the county's answer, when a man walks 6 feet and stops existing, is to reach into the file and take out the 6 feet. The case remains open. Delbert Rourke is still carried as a missing person, 63 years old, last seen leaving his own truck on a county road east of Sweet Home on the 3rd of March, 2018. The investigation the county cited, the open investigation that justified withholding the footage and redacting the report, has never produced a finding anyone has seen. What the search turned up is still in the file, in the parts of it that came out. The tracks that stopped in open ground, the scent that ended at the same 6 feet, the one set of prints in and none leading away, on mud that recorded everything else that touched it. The door bent outward, the patch of shoulder where something large had stood and left no weight behind. None of it was ever reconciled, none of it was ever explained. The searchers wrote down what they found, and the parts they wrote down that could be kept are the parts that survive, and they do not add up to anything a person is comfortable saying out loud. The public records response has a line in it near the top in the flat language those responses use. It says the request is granted in part and denied in part, and that certain records are withheld as exempt from disclosure due to an ongoing investigation. That is the line that started all of this. The line that told a stranger 2 years later that there was something there worth keeping back.
Certain records are withheld. There is a man missing off a county road in Oregon, and a deputy who saw the last of him and could not keep the seeing part in the file, and 11 seconds of footage that end when a flashlight drops. Everything else is a blacked out paragraph, and the smell in a wrecked truck, and 6 feet of prints in the mud. Real or fake, you decide.
In the fall of 2019,
two men went into a high drainage in the Oregon backcountry west of a small town called Prairie City on a late-season elk hunt. One of them was a guide named Errol Vance in his late 50s who had outfitted that country for more than 30 years and knew it the way a man knows the rooms of his own house in the dark. The other was his client, a 40-year-old shooter from out of state named Brett Coyle, who had paid well enough and who had, by every account, including his own, been hunting his whole life. They were supposed to be out in 2 days, but they came off the mountain on the 5th. Brett Coyle never hunted again after that trip, and Errol Vance has refused to take a client into that drainage ever since, and has turned down good money to do it.
And there is one thing that came out of those 5 days that neither man will screen for anybody: a short piece of video off a camera that was mounted to a rifle scope. The guide has talked about the trip some in the years since, in pieces to people he trusts. The client has never said a word. This is the guide's account, the way he tells it, put back together from the pieces he was willing to give. He is still angry when he tells it. That has never gone away. There is not much of an official record to set against it, and that is part of the shape of the thing. A hunt is not a crime. 2 men going into the backcountry and coming out late is not by itself anything anyone has to write down. What exists is small. There is an outfitter's log with the trip dates in it. There is an overdue party notice that a relative of Coyle's phoned in on the 4th, when the men were a day late and not answering, and there is a note that the notice was cleared on the 5th when they walked out. There is a Forest Service contact or two from the day and a half in between, rangers who made calls and looked at a trailhead and were stood down when the men turned up. That is the paper. None of it says a word about what happened up high. The men walked out, so the system that had begun to stir went back to sleep, and the only account of the middle of it is a guide's given in pieces years later to people he trusts and told the same way each time by a man who is still furious about it. Errol Vance had one rule for the high drainage, and he gave it to every client before they went up, the same way every time. There is a stretch of that country, up past the last of the good elk ground, where the timber gets old and the game gets quiet. And in that stretch, you glass all you want, but you do not shoot. You do not raise a rifle at anything that moves up there. And you do not ask him why. He'd been giving clients that rule for 30 years. Most of them thought it was an old outfitter's superstition, a story he told to make the trip feel wild, and he let them think that because it did not matter what they thought as long as they followed it. The ones who followed it came home. He was not interested in explaining the rule. He was interested in the rule being obeyed. He had not come to the rule out of nowhere. He does not lay all of it out, even now, but he lets enough of it show to understand that the rule was bought and paid for by other men, before his time and during it. He came up under an older outfitter who had the same rule and gave it to him the same flat way. No explanation, just the line about not shooting up high, and Vance had followed it for years before he ever understood it. The way you follow the deep water rule at a river long before you have seen anybody drown. And there had been, over the decades, in that part of the country, other parties. He knows the stories the way locals know them, in outline, without wanting the detail. Hunts that went bad up in that timber, men who came out changed and would not say why, or who did not come out at all and got written up as falls and exposure and got lost. The ordinary ways the backcountry takes people. On the record, he believes some of those ordinary ways were this. He believes the rule exists because enough men broke it that somebody had to make a rule, and that the reason nobody explains the rule is that explaining it does not help, and telling the story does not bring anyone back, and mostly it just gets you looked at. So the rule gets passed down bare. You do not shoot up high, you do not ask why, and you hope your client is the kind who does what he is told. Brett Coyle did not take the rule seriously. Vance knew that about him within the first hours, the way you know things about a man you're going to spend days in the wilderness with. Coyle was a good shooter, better than good, with an expensive rifle and a scope that cost more than some trucks, and a scope camera mounted on it because he liked to film his shots and put them up for people to watch. He had hunted all over, guided hunts and trophy hunts, and he had the confidence that comes with that, and also the particular blindness that comes with it. The belief that country is country, and that a man who has killed animals on 5 continents does not need to be told how to behave by a local outfitter in a place he has never been. He was not a bad man. Vance is careful about that. He was a competent, confident, experienced hunter who had never once in his life been in country that did not obey the rules he knew, and who had no framework for a place that ran on a different set of rules, and no reason yet to believe such a place existed. When Vance gave him the rule at the trailhead, Coyle nodded along and made a joke about it, something about not shooting the Sasquatch, and laughed, and Vance did not laugh, and Coyle noticed that, and it sat between them a little as they started up. Vance did not explain himself, he never did. He watched the joke land and not get picked up, and he watched Coyle file him in that moment as a superstitious local with a colorful line of patter. And he let Coyle file him that way because 30 years had taught him that the clients who argued with the rule were more dangerous than the ones who humored it, and humoring it was at least a start. He hoped humoring it would be enough. It was the kind of hope you carry into country you respect, knowing it is thin. They hunted the good ground the first day and saw sign, but no bull worth taking. On the second day, they went up high, up into the old timber, up toward the stretch. Vance did not let clients shoot in, because that is where the elk had gone. And Vance knew his business, and his business was putting the client on an animal. The country changed as they climbed, and Coyle did not read the change, but Vance did. The game went quiet, not fewer animals, no birds, no squirrels. The particular silence that Vance had learned a long time ago to respect. Vance had spent his life reading the small talk of the woods, the jays that scold and the squirrels that fuss, and the way a forest tells you what is moving through it if you know how to listen. And up high that morning, the woods had stopped talking. That is a sign he trusts more than any track. When the country goes silent like that, it is not empty. It is the opposite of empty. Everything smaller has gone still because something larger is there, and the silence is the shape of the larger thing, drawn by everything that has decided not to be seen. There was a smell up there under the timber, faint, sour, not rot exactly, something ranker and more alive than rot. And it came and went with no wind to move it, which is a thing Vance had noticed before, up high, and did not like. And at one point they came on a place where limbs had been broken and set, green limbs snapped off at head height and higher, and leaned together into a kind of structure, twisted, deliberate, not a thing wine does and not a thing an elk does, green wood that takes real strength to break, broken and arranged. Vance turned them wide around it without a word. Coyle asked what it was, and Vance said nothing and kept moving and set a harder pace, and watched the timber more than he watched his client. Coyle filed the structure as nothing. Just deadfall, just the woods. He did not notice that his guide had stopped hunting elk somewhere back down the slope, and had started quietly doing something else, which was getting a feel for how many directions the trouble might come from. They came out on a bench with a view across the drainage, a wide look at the far slope, and they set up to glass. And a little while into glassing, Coyle went still, and Vance followed his look, and there was movement on the far side, at the edge of the timber, maybe 500 or 600 yards out across the drainage. Vance knew what it was the moment he had it in his glass. He had seen them before, over 30 years, not often, but enough, upright. Far too tall for a man and too heavy through the shoulders, walking on two legs along the tree line the way a man walks. But wrong, the gait too smooth and the arms too long, and the whole shape of it built on a scale that does not exist in anything a person is supposed to see in the woods. He said the word out loud, quiet, flat, the way you would name a weather front. Sasquatch. He had said it to himself before. He had never had to say it to a client. And there was more than one. That was the thing he saw next, the thing that made him move. Behind the first, back in the timber, a second, paler, lighter through the hair, standing where the shadow of the trees broke it up so that you saw it and then lost it and then saw it again. And past that, deeper in, the sense of others, movement that did not resolve into shapes, timber shifting in a way timber does not shift on its own. A group. Not one animal caught in the open. Several spread along the far tree line the way a family spreads, or the way a hunting party spreads, with distance kept between them on purpose. And the first one out in the open where the glass could hold it. Exposed, deliberately or not, while the rest stayed in the trees. Vance had seen them before, but he had never seen a group. And the group was worse than any single one, because a single animal in the open is a thing that got caught, and a group spread in cover is a thing that is doing something. He did not know what they were doing. He knew only that it was arranged, that there was intention in the spacing, and that the last thing in the world a man wanted to do to an arrangement like that was put a bullet into the middle of it. Vance told Coyle to put the rifle down. He said it low, and he said it once, and he meant it with everything he had. Coyle already had the rifle up. He had it on the far shape, out across the drainage, at a range he had made 100 times on elk, and Vance could see him settling into it, and Vance said it again, put it down, and reached for the barrel. Coyle took the shot. The report went off the far slope and came back, that flat, hard crack rolling across the drainage and echoing, the loudest thing that country had heard in a long time, and Vance felt it in his chest and knew before the echo came back that everything had just changed. He was watching through his own glass. He saw the round connect. He had watched a great many animals take a great many rounds over 30 years, and he knew what it looks like when a bullet goes home, and it went home. He saw the far shape take it, saw the impact drive into it, and for a piece of a second it went down, folded at the middle, the way a struck animal folds when the shot is good. And then it did not stay down. It came back up. And that was the moment, Vance says, that the bottom fell out of the world he understood, because it did not come up the way a wounded animal comes up. A gut-shot animal fights its way up slow and wrong and blind with pain and staggers and goes a little way and lies down to die. This came up fast, and it came up oriented, up and already turning, up and looking, and there was nothing blind in it. And Vance knew from 30 years of watching things get shot that he was looking at the worst possible third thing, which is not a kill and not a miss, but a wound taken by something that a wound does not stop. Coyle had put a round into it and hurt it, badly, and not put it down. And now it was hurt, and it was aware, and it knew where the shot had come from, and it was not alone. Vance had time to think one clear thought, which was that in 30 years of the rule, he had never once until this second known for certain what the rule was for. And now he knew, and knowing was going to cost him everything he had to get out from under. Vance said the thing he remembers most is not the shape getting up. It is what the others did. They did not scatter. A herd scatters, breaks, runs blind in all directions away from a gunshot. And that is the thing every animal in that country does when a rifle goes off. And it is the thing Vance had built 30 years of expectation on. The others did not do it. They came out of the timber and they oriented all of them on the shot, on the bench, on the two men. They did not run from the sound, they turned toward it. They stood along that tree line across the drainage and they faced the two men who had just put a bullet into one of them, and they did it together at the same time, the way people turn when they have all heard the same thing and all understood it. That is when Vance stopped being a guide with a client and became a man trying to get two people off a mountain alive. He was already packing the glass and pulling Coyle up by the shoulder before the far slope had gone quiet. He did not explain. There was no time in it for explaining, and he was too far past furious to try. Coyle was slow to understand. He was still up on the adrenaline of the shot, still half proud of it, and he wanted to go recover the animal the way a hunter does, wanted to go down into the drainage and across and find what he had hit. And Vance turned on him. That is the one time in the account where Vance says he lost his composure. Up on that bench with the light starting to go and the far tree line full of shapes that had turned to face them, he grabbed Coyle and he told him what he had done. He told him it was not an animal. He told him there was a rule, the one rule, the only rule he had, and that Coyle had broken it, and now they were both in it, both of them. Because up here, what one man does gets answered on both of them. He told Coyle they were not going to recover anything. They were going to walk out right now, and they were going to be lucky if walking out was a thing they still got to do. They did not make it out before dark. The country was too rough, and the light went too fast, and Vance was not going to run men off a cliff in the black. So they made a cold camp, no fire, in the best defensive spot Vance could find, back against rock. And they waited out the night. And the night came to the edges of the camp, not an attack. Vance was clear about that in the telling. Nothing came into the camp, but something was around it all night, moving at the edge of where they could hear, testing the dark. Rocks came down, one at a time, spaced out over the hours, landing close but never on them, one off to the left and then a long wait, and then one off to the right, which is not a thing that happens by accident on a still night, which is a thing that is done on purpose by something that wants you to know it is there and can reach you and is choosing not to yet. A rock thrown to land near you in the dark is a sentence. It says, I know exactly where you are. It says, I could. It says, not yet. And it says it over and over, all night, so that you never once get to believe you imagined it. There were sounds Vance would not describe in detail, sounds he said he had heard before, up in that country, on the nights he does not talk about. And one kind of sound in particular that he will only call a call, a long carrying call that came from one side of the camp and was answered from another side, so that he knew there were at least two of them out there in the dark, and that they were talking to each other across the two men in the middle. He said knowing they were talking was worse than any single sound. It meant coordination. It meant the night was not one creature's grief, but a group's, organized, spread around the camp, in communication, working something out. And he said the worst of it was how patient it was. It was not frantic. It was not the behavior of an animal defending itself, which is loud and brief and over. It was deliberate, and it was in no hurry. And it went on the whole night, hour after hour, the rocks and the calls and the movement at the edge of hearing. And Vance understood, sitting against that rock with his own rifle across his knees, a rifle he knew now was close to useless, and a client who had finally gone silent beside him, that this was not going to stop when the sun came up. That a thing had been started that ran on its own clock now, and the clock was not his. He said that up in that country there are stories among the few men who guide it and the fewer who live near it, about parties that went in and had trouble like this, about a stretch of drainage everybody who knows better stays out of, about why nobody talks. He had never been the one the story was about. He had spent 30 years being the man who knew the rule and kept his clients on the right side of it. He said sitting against that rock, he understood he was going to be a story now, if he got to be anything at all. In the gray before full light, when there was just enough to see by, Vance went a little way out from the camp to read the ground because he needed to know how many and how close before he moved his client into the open. And he found the ground red all around them. The camp had been circled in the night, more than once, at a distance of maybe 20 yards, a loose ring worn into the duff, and the frost by something that had walked it over and over while the two of them sat against the rock. The stride of it was wrong, too long, and the depth of it in the frozen ground was wrong, too deep. And here and there the ring came in closer than 20 yards, came into 10 to less, right up to the edge of where they had been sitting, and then went back out. It had come in to look at them, repeatedly, and it had not done anything, which Vance understood now was not mercy and was not fear. It was consideration. Something had spent the whole night deciding, walking its circle and coming in close to look at the two men and going back out to keep deciding. And the decision had not been to kill them in the dark, and Vance did not let himself believe that meant the decision had been made in their favor. It meant only that the dark had not been the place for it. He went back and got Coyle up and did not tell him about the ring. They moved at first light, day 3, down out of the high timber, and they were not allowed to go the easy way. Vance knew the country. He knew the good route out, the drainage that fed down to a trail that fed down to the truck. And every time he tried to work them toward it, they got turned. Not by anything they could see clearly, by movement in the timber on that side, by a shape that put itself between them and the easy ground, by sound coming from exactly the direction he wanted to go. They were herded. There's no other word Vance uses for it. Something that knew the country as well as he did was closing the doors he wanted and leaving open only the doors it wanted, pushing them off the good route and down into harder, steeper, worse country where a man breaks a leg and does not come out. The herding went on for hours, and it was not random. Vance would pick a line and start on it, and within a few minutes there would be a reason not to hold it, a sound off to that side, a shape at the edge of sight, a fresh smell hanging in the exact draw he had meant to take, and he would have to give and swing the other way. And the other way was always down and always into worse country. And he understood that he was being read as easily as he read elk. Something ahead of him knew what a man does, knew that a man turns away from a sound and toward open ground and downhill toward water. And it was using all of that, offering him the choices it wanted him to make and closing off the ones it did not. He had spent 30 years pushing game through country by knowing what it would do. He spent that morning being pushed by something that knew what he would do. And the reversal of it was the most frightening thing he had ever felt in the woods, worse than any single side of the thing, because it meant the mind on the other side of it was at least as good as his and had all the advantages. And once in the middle of that, it was close. Coming down through a band of broken rock and blowdown, Coyle was ahead and below, and it came at them off the uphill side fast, out of timber that should not have hidden something that size, moving faster downhill through bad footing than anything that large has any right to move. For a moment, it had the ground between Vance and Coyle, and Vance thought he was about to watch it take his client off the mountain in front of him, and he did the only thing he had, which was make noise and movement to pull it toward himself instead. He does not describe it at that range. He says only that it was on them, that he was close enough to smell it and to feel the ground take its weight, and that there was a gap in the rock, a chimney between two boulders too tight for the thing to follow through fast. And both men went into it and down and came out the bottom somehow, torn up, bleeding from the rock, Coyle having shed his pack to fit through, and that it did not come down the chimney after them. It stayed up in the timber above the rock, let them get a little further down. And then it started pushing again from behind now, unhurried, keeping them moving, keeping them going the direction it wanted. And Vance understood that the gap in the rock had not been an escape. It had been permitted. They had gotten through because getting through was still inside whatever the thing was doing with them. Somewhere in that run, down low, they passed the sign that told Coyle what he had done. Vance saw it first, and he made Coyle look. Blood, a lot of it, gone brown, and drag sign, and the smell of it. Down along the route they were being pushed through, as though they were being walked past it on purpose. The one Coyle had shot had come down off the far slope and into this drainage, hurt, and had bled out its life somewhere down in this timber, or was still bleeding it out, and the men were being routed right past the evidence of it. Vance said he made sure Coyle understood what he was looking at. He set it up close, the way he had set it on the bench, because he wanted it to land and stay landed. This is what you did, not an animal. You hurt one of them, and it died in here, and this, all of this, the night and the hurting and the rock. This is not a hunt gone wrong. This is grief. This is being answered by something that lost one of its own and knows exactly who did it and is deciding mile by mile what it wants to do about it. Coyle broke down there by the blood. That is the part Vance tells with the least satisfaction because there is no satisfaction in it. The man who had made the joke at the trailhead and taken the shot against a direct order and wanted to go recover his trophy was gone, and what was left was a man on his knees in the timber next to the sign of what he had killed, understanding it all at once. Vance did not comfort him. He got him up and moving because moving was the only thing that mattered, but he made sure first that Coyle had it, all of it, the whole shape of what he had done. Not an animal, one of them, something that lived in a group and kept spacing and broke green wood into shapes and walked a ring around a camp all night deciding, something with enough of a mind that the word animal did not cover it and never had. And Coyle had put a round into one, and it had bled out its life in this drainage, and now the rest of them knew, and were walking the two men down through the proof of it, slow so that it could not be mistaken for anything but what it was. The retaliation was never mindless. That is the thing Vance comes back to. It was not a wounded predator lashing out. It was patient, and it was coordinated, and it was aimed. It knew which of the two men had fired, and it had never once in a day and a half made a mistake about that. Never turned on Vance the way a blind, angry animal turns on whatever is nearest. It kept its aim. It had chosen not to end it in the night when it easily could have. It was doing something slower and worse, walking them out through the consequence of the shot. And Vance believes to this day that whether they lived or died was a decision that had not been made yet, and was being made somewhere he could not see by something with the right to make it, and that the whole march down the mountain was the making of it. They came down to the mouth of the drainage in the last of the light on the third day, where the high country broke down into a wider valley and a river ran across the bottom, and the pursuit stopped. It stopped at the river, exactly at it. Vance says they crossed the water and came up the far bank and turned around, and the timber behind them was quiet, and nothing came out of it, and nothing came to the edge of the water, and the thing that had walked them for a day and a half simply was not there anymore. There was a line, and the line was the river, or was something the river marked, and on the near side of it they had been prey, and on the far side of it they were two exhausted men standing on a bank. It did not run out of strength. It did not lose the trail. It came to the line, and it stopped on purpose, because the line was where it stopped, the way the rule had always implied there was a place the high country ended, and past which its rules did not run. Vance says that is the part that stays with him worst. Not being chased, being let go. Because a thing that cannot follow you is one kind of afraid, and a thing that could follow you and chooses the line instead is another kind entirely. A thing with law in it, a thing that decided your debt was paid at the water and not one step before. He had spent 30 years thinking the rule was about keeping clients from getting hurt. He came off that mountain understanding the rule was about not incurring the debt in the first place, because the debt gets collected on terms you do not set, and you only walk away from it if whatever holds the line decides you can. They came off the mountain on the 5th, 2 days late, both alive, both changed. An overdue party report had gone in, and a couple of Forest Service people had started asking around. And then the two men walked out on their own, and the report resolved itself the way most of them do, and nobody looked any harder. Coyle went home. He did not renew his tag the next year or any year after. He got rid of the rifle, Vance heard, though he does not know that for certain. Vance stopped taking clients into that drainage and has turned down the money to do it more than once. And when people ask him why, he tells them the same thing he told his clients for 30 years, which is that there is a stretch of that country where you do not shoot, and you do not ask him why. The only thing that came out of those 5 days that proves any of it is the clip off Coyle's scope camera, the few seconds around the shot, and neither man will play it for anybody. Vance has seen it. He will not describe what is on the end of it past the shot. He says it does not show the round connecting the way he saw it connect, and it does not show the nights, and it does not show the river, because a scope camera only films what the scope is pointed at, and by the time any of the real thing was happening, no one was pointing a rifle at it. It ends before anything is settled. It is 8 seconds of a far tree line, and a shape in the reticle and a shot, and then it is over. And everything that made those 5 days what they were happened in the country, the camera never turned a face. There is no case here in the way a missing person is a case. Nobody died that a record was kept of. The elk tag went unfilled. The overdue report closed. There's a guide who quietly stopped running one drainage and a client who quietly stopped hunting and a piece of video. 2 men will not screen. And out in that high country, past the last of the good ground, there is a stretch of old timber where the game goes quiet and the rule still stands, waiting on the next man who thinks it is a story. Vance's last word on it is always the rule. You glass all you want, you do not shoot. And you do not ask him why.
Real or fake, you decide. I was Alex, and this has been another case from the files. And if it kept you up, you know what to do. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.